My name's Mike Hansen. I'm the Texas dad lawyer, and at 17 years of age, my mama had instilled in me a very simple principle, something that I live by until this day. And the saying goes something like this: Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Folks, I'm here to chop up some dash cam footage and body-worn camera footage involving the shooting of a 17-year-old. I know that I was a pretty foolish 17-year-old, but I know that I would not have had the sense that this young man, Elijah Hadley, had whenever meeting with a law enforcement officer and walking on the side of a road to toss an airsoft gun so that it would not be confused with a real gun and I would not be harmed. I am so exhausted to have to go through this and do this, but I do believe the request of one of my followers to do so may be beneficial for everyone to better understand the situation, to raise awareness and justice for Elijah Hadley in his in this incident with him being shot to death. And I also feel like it may help the public to better understand the law and what's going on here in the first month of this, what is presumed to be investigation. So let me start with this. Here we see the initial dash camera footage from the deputy who responded. It's well lit up by even though it's dark out, the scene is well lit by his headlights. And we see Elijah Hadley, who had been called in for a welfare check. He is tossing what is later discovered to be an airsoft gun off to the side of the road. He is tossing it. His hand is pointing out into the dark yonder, and the gun is now probably 6 inches away from his hand. Clearly not a threat to this deputy at this point in time. Now we can put ourselves in the deputy's shoes, right? We can understand that he's responding to a call where he doesn't really know anything about this individual. It's dark, it's near midnight. He sees a gun. Certainly his stress level is on the rise. Certainly the adrenaline's pumping. Certainly he is also always worried about his own well-being. So we can certainly understand where seeing something that ever even looks like a gun, a call out in a field of practice, in a field of a profession where they see some of the most horrific things on a normal basis, could cause some alarm. Yet the fact remains that nothing about this posture at this particular time warrants for a deadly threat, or warrants the idea that this individual is brandishing the gun in a fashion that he intends to use it against the deputy. Now, what I presume to be here on the dash cam here on the left side, because it wasn't there a minute ago, is the fire powder or the smoke, whatever you want to call it, coming from the deputy's firearm, because at this point in time we know that he shoots 4 rounds off towards young Elijah Hadley. You can see that gun looks like it's about to have hit the ground, or it's hitting the ground here in the still. Yet, even though he does not have a gun facing towards the deputy at this point in time, there are bullets flying towards him and hitting him, and he will be crippled. He will fall to the ground, injured, but still able to communicate with this deputy. And here is yet another footage. We call it body-worn camera footage. To take into consideration, we see that the time is 11:12, and we see the deputy communicating to dispatch what we assume would be his call signal, 42 Basin, shots fired, shots fired. So typically we're going to identify ourselves on the radio. I'm not a law enforcement officer. I'm talking in the colloquial somebody would identify themselves, and then they would tell the dispatcher what's going on. And you can see that Elijah Hadley is communicating to the officer. He's still alive. He's able to communicate. He has the awareness to tell him it's just a BB gun, and he's injured and he's on the ground. He's bleeding and he needs help. The officer clearly is able to follow his training and go and get what is labeled and seen in the body-worn camera footage here as a bleeding control kit. That would be the equivalent to a med kit. It would probably have the tools necessary to perhaps apply a tourniquet, maybe a patch for a chest wound of some sort, some of the basic medical equipment that officers are used to possibly save somebody's life. It's clear that the deputy knew that Hadley was injured, that he needed help, and was taking a step to possibly apply that life-saving services to Elijah Hadley. Unfortunately, this incident takes a tragic turn. Or perhaps I should say more tragic turn, because Elijah Hadley, while he is bleeding on the ground, is shot another 12 times by the deputy. I think it's unclear whether he shot 15 or possibly 16 times. I'm reading discrepancies in some of the news reports. I think the minimum is 15. We know Glocks, standard issued police Glocks, are going to hold 15 bullets in the magazine. Whether there'd be one in the chamber for possible use, and it could have been 16. The point is that there was an incredible amount of bullets that were discharged at an individual, a majority of them being while he was on the ground, helpless and injured. And this is really where my analysis takes a turn for the worse for the deputy, because the initial shock and the initial fear of that weapon being used when it was first seen and it's dark, and perhaps he's a little bit afraid, it should have been gone. And to then empty your clip, more or less, into a man who's bleeding on the ground seems completely unreasonable. Now in New Mexico, and I'll give you the disclaimer, I'm not licensed in New Mexico. I've been a prosecutor and I've done criminal defense work over the past 10 years in the state of Texas, but the laws are pretty much the same. You have a first-degree murder charge that can be possibly considered, as well as a second degree. Second degree is going to obviously be an easier set of elements to prove here. And really the question, no matter what you charge, if you choose to charge this individual who shot Elijah Hadley, the question is going to be whether self-defense is going to apply, and if it applies, whether it's going to be successfully raised in the course of what would likely be a jury trial. And so just get into the meats and potatoes of this legal matter. What would need to be shown, right? There's 3 prongs to self-defense, it seems, at least according to online, what's available online in New Mexico. And one is an appearance of immediate danger. Officer's going to be able to testify to that. He's going to say he saw that gun, thought it was going to be used against him. He acted quickly to preserve his life. The defendant was, in fact, put in such fear. That would be something that the deputy would testify to. He'd say he felt fear. And the argument, the entirety of the argument is going to be what it usually is, and that is whether the jurors believe he acted reasonable, whether a reasonable person would have reacted in a similar manner. Had this case been just the initial shooting, this officer probably would have had a very successful chance at beating a charge if he ends up charged. However, with the second set of shooting, with the individual on the ground, bleeding, hurt, clearly without a weapon in his hands, and the magazine being emptied, I do not believe that most people are going to find that reasonable. He's going to have a very difficult time if he's charged getting past that fact, but it is possible. You're innocent unless proven guilty in a court of law with a jury of your peers. That's our Constitution, and so we have to keep that all in mind. Now, some people have commented and been upset that they are not releasing the identity of the deputy who shot, and the shots which obviously killed Elijah Hadley. I will say I looked up the Public Information Act that applies to New Mexico, and the disclosure, the exceptions to the disclosure of public information, such as the identity of this officer. And it is an exception. Individuals accused but not charged with a crime, law enforcement records that reveal that confidential information do not have to be disclosed. However, I'll give you a hint. If you're somebody who really wants to know who that is, he provided you the call sign. You simply would make a public information request for the call sign, the identity of the individuals with the call sign, 42 Basin. I don't believe that they would be able to withhold that from you and very quickly be able to discover the identity of that law enforcement officer that's responsible for shooting Elijah Hadley 15 times. Last I checked, it's not illegal to walk around with a airsoft gun. And kids will be kids. They won't always make the best decisions. However, we need our law enforcement officers to be making better decisions. Whether it's Sonia Massey or Elijah Hadley, Americans are dying because of poor decision-making by our law enforcement officers. And so, again, a call for justice for Elijah Hadley. I hope this helped you understand what's going on, and I hope it raises awareness.